Okay, welcome to Quest 1, Literary Nonfiction. Together, we are going to look at some of the characteristics of literary nonfiction and get you set to start reading a literary nonfiction piece of your very own. You've probably learned about the differences between fiction and nonfiction since you were in kindergarten. And essentially, fiction is the one that's not true, and nonfiction is the one that is true. And there are lots of different kinds of fiction. Harry Potter is an example of a fictional novel. Poetry falls under the fiction category, and plays, movies, that kind of thing. Those would all be considered fiction. And what you might not realize is that there are actually lots of different kinds of nonfiction too. We've got autobiographies, speeches, textbook, letters, biographies, interviews would count as nonfiction, diaries, even instructions. So I think a lot of the time we focus on some reading the kind of nonfiction that you would read in a science class, maybe a biology textbook or something like that. But that's a very different kind of reading than literary nonfiction. And literary nonfiction actually reads a lot like fiction. And what we're going to be doing is looking at the characteristics of literary nonfiction and how it's like fiction and unlike fiction. Let's look at two different examples of nonfiction. The first one is from the World Book Encyclopedia. Of the typical owls, the great horned owl lives in many places throughout North America. The eyes are very large. These eyes point forward, unlike the eyes of most birds. For this reason, owls can watch an object with both eyes at the same time. They have binocular vision, like man. The next selection is from The Moon of the Owls. This is also nonfiction. The owl, who stood almost 2 feet high, stared into the sunless forest. To him, there was no darkness. The pale light from the moon and stars and the reflections off the snow and clouds fell onto mirror-like cells on the retina of his eyes. The cells magnified the dim light, and he could see even though it was dark. He saw a snowflake on his great hooked beak. He saw a twig fall from the pine. Through these eyes and his unique ear, the night is day. So both of these excerpts are on the same topic, owls, and both excerpts talk about the owl's eyes. However, the World Book Encyclopedia uses much more simple sentence construction and not as many words, and the language is very simple. The Moon of the Owls is longer, and it's longer because it has lots of description and figurative language. We have a simile over here, the mirror-like cells on the retina of his eyes, and imagery. It's easier for the reader to picture the owl in this situation in his environment. We know that it's sunless and how beautiful the snow is and the moon and the stars. This author has used a lot of detail and description to show instead of tell. And that's really the essence of the difference between literary nonfiction and nonfiction. In literary nonfiction, the authors are using their senses to tell stories, and they're showing, not telling, and they also allow humanity and warmth to come through in their writing, where the purpose of something like the World Book Encyclopedia is just to get information to people as quickly as possible. And that's okay. That's an important kind of writing, but it's just not literary nonfiction. So that's really the essence of the difference. We're going to be reading a literary nonfiction piece together, and what you'll notice is that what we talked about before, informational nonfiction has an objective tone and it just gives the facts, where literary nonfiction is a little bit richer. The author might include personal examples and ideas. There will be details that help the reader imagine what everything looks like and feels like and sounds like. The diction will be very strong, very specifically chosen to create a specific mood, and then There will probably be figurative language and imagery, and often literary nonfiction will have a first person point of view. It brings that the author into the story rather than the author just objectively presenting the facts. And I think in the piece that we're going to look at, you'll see that the author does bring himself into it, and it isn't actually, you'll see all of these pieces in our reading.